we're going to start off with talking about sleep myths. What are some common sleep myths that people have that you can actually go ahead and share?
Yeah, well, there are a couple main ones that I think permeate a lot. So the biggest one that I hear about is I must get 8 hours of sleep. So the National Sleep Foundation recommends that adults 18 to 64 get 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. However, when you look in the fine print of their recommendations, you will see that they say 6 to 10 hours may be appropriate for some people. So that's quite a bit of latitude. So what I like to share with people is that, you need to really find what I call your sleep sweet spot, really find the amount of sleep that is conducive for you. And it may be 8, it may be 7, it may be 6.5, but it's not necessarily always 8 for the same person. And the thing that gets us into trouble about that, quite honestly, is that so the message honestly is meant to be shared for people as a public service announcement. So to really encourage people who are burning the candle at both ends to maybe do away with 5 hours a night, or maybe to reconsider their sleep habits, which is fine, no problem with that. But who ends up hearing these messages are mostly the people who have insomnia. And those people are really giving their full effort to getting sleep, but are struggling and may not be reaching that 7 to 8 hours. Quite often they do, but sometimes they're not. And they start to panic and think they're broken or there's something wrong with them. And what can end up happening is the more pressure you put on yourself to sleep 8 hours, if you have insomnia, the more it could backfire and potentially make your sleep worse because you're so anxious. So bottom line is sleep is like a shoe. It's like sleep numbers are like a shoe size. So, or a calorie need. We all have our own individual ones, and it's not going to be cut and dried 8 hours for everybody. So,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
that makes total sense because my husband says, he was at a pattern where he would go to bed at 9 o'clock. This is before we met, or before we got married, sorry. And then he would tell me I would need to go to bed at 9 and then wake up at a certain time. He would need his 8 hours sleep. For me, 3 hours of sleep sometimes is okay. 5 hours sleep sometimes is okay. 6 hours. It depends. And I still feel good. It's just I can see what you're talking about. Like people are like thinking about, oh, I must get this much sleep. And that's what probably prevents them from sleeping well because they're thinking about it and their mind is just thinking, thinking, thinking. Yeah, so I used to suffer a lot from insomnia. And that's because I was drinking so much, thinking that it was actually going to help me sleep. And so I notice a lot of people tend to go to sleep aids. They'll go ahead and drink. Why do you think people gravitate towards sleep aids? And what are some potential dangers or drawbacks that you've noticed from taking it for prolonged periods?
Yeah, well, I have personal experience taking sleep aids. So I was dependent on Ambien for 8 years. And here's why I think they're prescribed so often. It's because if somebody's having trouble sleeping, their most typical action is to go to their primary care doctor. The primary care doctor, being well-meaning as they are, typically has about 2 hours of sleep science behind his or her belt. And because they're really not well versed in how to deal with sleep issues, they will quite often pull out their prescription pad and write a prescription for a sleep aid. And that's not always bad because sometimes there's a crisis situation, there's a death or a divorce, and somebody does need a pill to get them to sleep. But the problem with the way a lot of doctors prescribe sleeping medications is that they don't build in any kind of exit strategy for the patient. They don't say, okay, you're going to be taking, this pill for this many weeks, for 4 weeks or whatever. What they tend to do is give them like a refill after refill. And I've had several clients, unfortunately, be dependent on Ambien for 10, 20 years because their doctor never gave them that exit strategy and just kept them on it, which is really unfortunate. And I can speak for myself. When I was dependent on Ambien, it did actually work for me in terms of like it got me to sleep more quickly because it was usually taking like 2 hours for me to fall asleep. But the problem was I was incredibly groggy the next day. I really didn't feel like I was actually awake till close to noon. And it did start to create problems with my job because I was in a position where I had to like write on the spot, like write a press release or whatever. And I remember just there were times when they were like, okay, write this in 10 minutes or whatever. And I was just frozen at my keyboard. And they were like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got the residual grogginess. And as I've become more versed in sleep, I discovered that 80% of people have next day side effects from sleeping pills, such as grogginess, trouble waking up, foggy headedness. So there are, quite a few issues with them. And I hope that answered the question. I kind of went on a tangent,
Yeah,
but
no,
I
I love
could talk on
tangents.
that.
I love tangents, by the way, so I'm all good with that.
Yeah, I mean, I could really talk on that topic for a long time, but I think that the main takeaway is they do have their place, but we have to be cognizant of how long we take them because the package insert on in the pills does say they're meant for short-term use up to 4 weeks. So we really need to be mindful about how they're used.
Yeah, I've heard some horror stories before where they just don't even remember walking around, and after they've taken some type of sleep aid and they're just walking around the house and like a zombie or something that people have been told me this in the past. I'm like, ah,
Oh
that's
yeah.
scary.
Yeah, I actually had several instances where I ate after I took the pills and, wasn't 100% aware of eating. People will get in the car and drive. People will do dangerous things. And they ended up putting a black box warning on this class of sleeping pills in 2019 because of this reason, because so many people were hurting themselves and others. So it's really, I mean, we sometimes kind of laugh it off because eating is not like a huge hazard or shopping on the internet like when you're not aware is not ideal, but it's not really that harmful. But like when you get behind the wheel of a car, that could
Yeah,
be hurting really yourself or another person. So
right.